Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Star Wars Generations podcast. Friends, we've been talking about this for a long time. Today is the day when we are doing our review of Revenge of the Sith. We didn't mean for it to have to wait so long, but the combination of just all the great Star Wars content we're getting, some difficult schedules to arrange, and the fact that Alex was so excited about this that building it up and building it up and building it up. If we're going to talk about the Edge Lord, we might as well edge Alex while we, build up to that. So we decided to just have a lot of fun with it. So today we are here to talk about the movie Revenge of the Sith. We're not going to do a plot summary because I think most people have seen it and can remember some of the big details. And oddly, there actually isn't that much plot. It's mostly just about these very important moments that happen in driving the Star Wars story forward. And I know, Alex, this is an incredible movie to you. So let me start by asking a question that I think a lot of people have from the very beginning when they start watching this movie. What does it mean that there are heroes on both sides?
A great question. Great question. And I don't think that
I'm a little bit trolling Alex because I thought he thought I was building him up to talk about the movie itself. But
I am being trolled, but it's fine.
We're in the middle of the Civil War, the Separatists versus the Republic. We're 3 years in, and it tells us that evil is everywhere, but there are heroes on both sides. What does that mean?
Well, it's interesting because I think the meaning changed for me from when I first saw the movie as a kid after the Clone Wars all came out. Because, through the Clone Wars, we get to see a deeper look into the Separatists and, that there are good people on that side and they're just kind of pawns in this larger game being played by Palpatine and Dooku. And, the reference to me now saying there's heroes on both sides references the fact that there are really good people fighting for what they believe is freedom and, justice for their people and getting away from corruption in government. That's what the Separatists' whole belief is, that the Republic is corrupt, which, they're not wrong. And I don't know. I just think that that meaning that's one phrase has taken on more meaning as we've gotten to see more and more stories told during the Clone Wars period over the last 19 years now.
Yeah. That's totally fair.
Yeah. Well, I do want to mention they actually used that quote in a very clever way in the Clone Wars. There's an episode called Heroes on Both Sides, and that's where Ahsoka goes and meets Lux Bonteri for the first time, and Mina Bonteri.
That's the exact episode I was thinking of, actually. So I didn't realize that was what the episode was called. That's incredible.
Yeah. No, I really love that episode. And I try not to go into too many inside baseball theories about the stuff, but I've always kind of thought that part of the thinking there was, some people had been like, okay, yeah, what did it say in that? What do you mean heroes on both sides? That let's give some heroes to the Separatists because we need to have that to make sense. Well, okay, so that little fun aside, let's pull back a bit. Alex, I know this movie is incredibly important to you. Let's just start there. What does this movie mean for you?
Yeah. So, I mean, this was, well, first of all, when I was a kid, the forbidden movie at first, because I was able to watch all the other Star Wars movies, episodes 1, 2, 4, 5, 6. But my mom was like, episode 3 is it's rated PG-13. It's too intense for you. You can't watch this. So I had to wait over a year or two before I was able to finally get the DVD under the Christmas tree and watch it at home.
And just to get an idea, you were 7 or 8 at this time?
Yeah, so the movie came out in 2005. I was 8 when it came out. My mom wouldn't let me see it until I turned 10. So I turned, just over a year, because it was about just over a year. So when I turned 10, I was able to finally see it. And so I'm just reliving the moments, rewatching it for the first time. But I was just blown away from every aspect of it. To me, it connected all of the storylines that exist in the original trilogy with the prequels. It finally answered my 8-year-old questions, brain questions of how does, obviously, you can see the signs more when you get older. But I'm how does Anakin become this evil robot man that we see in, in the originals? And where does this portrayal come from? Anakin and Obi-Wan are inseparable in these early movies, and they're enemies. I mean, Vader killed Obi-Wan in episode 4. How do we get to this point? What happens to all the Jedi? And I just thought that Lucas so masterfully crafted, in the best of the prequels, in my opinion, this story of, loss and tragedy, but also still holding on to that hope that we see and setting up the hope that we see in the original movies. But it makes them, to me, it enhances the originals because it makes them feel so much more meaningful. It makes Obi-Wan and Yoda's loss and their tribulations and their exile is so much more important and meaningful, and the betrayal and the mastery behind the fall of the Republic. Oh my God, it just brings everything together for me. It's such a compelling movie, like start to finish. And like you said, it's really, this whole movie is like a week, not even. It's like 1 week of content happening in this short period. And it's so many just powerful payoff moments that I feel like as a fan I waited for to see for so long. And yeah, that's why it's so meaningful to me.
Yeah, I can see that. Erin, what about yourself? Tell us about when you first watched this movie and kind of the influence it had on you then, and how you feel about it now.
Oh yeah, I don't know when I first watched this movie, because same thing with you, Alex. It was like the forbidden film. It's like too dark, too intense. Yeah, and by the time like I was old enough to watch it, I was so conscious of what would happen. Like I knew about Order 66 and I knew about Anakin's fall, and I didn't want to watch it. Because especially
Sure.
at that point, the Clone Wars had come out. I'd been watching the Clone Wars. I had fallen in love with this version of Anakin Skywalker, and I didn't want to see that just crumble, really. So yeah, I know I definitely watched it a couple of years ago for the first time. It was weird because it's a movie that then has so much buildup in my mind.
Right.
And I still really enjoyed it. I mean, especially with the revival of the prequels in the most recent years and the constant memes we see, the amount of memes I've seen of General Grievous either being like, "It's time to abandon ship," boop, 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 or like the scene where the Utapawan leader says, "Lower or 10th level, thousands of battle droids," or something like that. I always see those memes. And so I feel like I was very familiar with this movie outside of the actual plot of the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Meme
yeah, I
culture's
don't
giving
know.
it a
So I
second
was just
life.
exactly. As the people who watch as kids have grown up into meme gods, we're getting some great stuff online about this film.
It's so
Um,
true.
but yeah, so it was just really enjoyable for me to like actually sit and fully watch it. I had a great time. I put on my Darth Vader ColourPop eye makeup look today just to be very on theme. I'm feeling Sith, I'm feeling dark side, and I'm feeling ready to talk about this.
I like it. Well, we're gonna have a lot to talk about right after this.
All right, we're starting the conversation here, but we do want to hear from you guys as well. Send your thoughts, questions, or anything else you want to hear us discuss to feedback@theethicalpanda.com. Or you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, or TikTok under Star Wars Generations. If you really want, you can even chat with us on Discord or Facebook. The links for both of those will be in our show notes. Otherwise, for any information regarding us, you can always check our website at theethicalpanda.com. And, I don't know, if you like this content, if you just can't get enough of the three of us and our fun little banter, why not become a member? You get early access to ad-free episodes for all of the Ethical Panda podcasts, along with bonus content at the end of most episodes. Plus, there are episodes that are just for you guys. There's member-only episodes. It's just $5 a month if you want to join with our members, hang out a little more. Or if you want to do it for a full year, awesome. It'll be $55. Save a little bit. You can sign up at theethicalpanda.com or through the link in our show notes. Now, back to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Erin, for those great words. So let's kind of dive into some of the parts of the movie, because I think one of the things that comes up all the time when people discuss this movie is the topic of blame and of whose fault is it that Anakin falls, whose fault is it that the Republic falls, all these kind of different things. And Alex, you started by bringing up, the masterful plan. Talk about Palpatine in this movie and sort of how you feel about what he is able to put in motion.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this movie is a fruition of his long laid plans that, I guess really predate him even back to his master in Darth Plagueis, and that like their plan was from the beginning to take over the Republic and like reclaim it for the Sith, but in a very like, they knew that like there wasn't an army of Sith anymore. There's just two of them. So even when Plagueis was gone, Palpatine knew that he had to do it the old fashioned way, like legally through the systems. I do want to break
in for a second. In the Legends novel, Darth Plagueis, they talk about how Plagueis was Palpatine's master to when Sidious was the apprentice. I don't think it's ever been confirmed in Disney canon, has it?
I'm pretty sure it's confirmed that Plagueis is his master. I don't think any of the story beyond that has been confirmed. So I guess I'm going a little bit off some of the EU content and that they planned it together, but fair enough. Either way, even if you want to call it Palpatine's plan from the beginning, the plan being to very like Hitler-esque take over through the legal channels of power. I mean, he was legally elected a senator, legally elected chancellor, sneakily raised the clone army in secret, obviously. But to me, Anakin was always this key to his plan. I think that, again, not canonized, but maybe it is. I'm not positive, but at least in the expanded universe, it's understood that Palpatine is aware that him and Plagueis' actions caused the creation of Anakin, either directly or indirectly. So Anakin was basically Palpatine's target from early on. That's why Palpatine had interest in him from the beginning, aversions in the Force, knowing that if he could have the most powerful Force user under his power and his control, he would have no problem enforcing and ruling over the galaxy. And so to me, this final week, we get to see, like, this is it. This is like make or break for Palpatine's plan. All of these years of pandering to the Jedi and ruling over the galaxy in the legal way. This is his time to make his move. And he pulled it off pretty dang effectively. I mean, when in the scene in the movie where he reveals to Anakin that he is a Sith Lord, you could see his hand twitching, basically both anxious and ready to grab his hidden lightsaber if he needs to fight Anakin in that moment, because he's not sure how it's going to react. He really put all his cards on the table, with Anakin as the main player. And I don't know, man. I just felt like Palpatine's mastery is what caused both the Republic to fall and Anakin to fall. But, and we'll get into it more, I'm sure, the Jedi are absolutely not blameless. They were blind to many signs that Palpatine was not who he said he was, and that the dark side's influence over the Republic was growing and growing. And people point blank saying to you, Dooku saying to Obi-Wan in Episode 2, a Dark Lord controls the Senate and the Republic. Right. The Jedi failed, but Palpatine's mastery and puppetry really orchestrated this whole thing to be, what it became, the Empire.
I really like that frame. Go ahead, Erin.
I was just going to say, if I may, although I am an Anakin Skywalker apologist, I will say the Jedi had some blame. Obviously, Palpatine did a lot of sneakiness behind the scenes. But at the end of the day, Anakin Skywalker is a grown-ass man. Yes, he's very young. He's about 20, maybe 22. Do you know exactly, Alex?
He was 9 in Episode 1, so he would be 20? 22?
Yeah, he's
Attack of Clones.
Yeah, he's 22 then.
As someone who is 22, I would love if I could just write off all the mistakes I've made as being a young adult who doesn't know better. But yeah, I see it as yes, he was tricked. He was definitely groomed by Palpatine from day one. That was something very difficult to get out of and to recognize. But at the same time, he had spent so much of his time with Obi-Wan that he knew better. When he kills Dooku, he says, I shouldn't have done that. It's not the Jedi way. He was unarmed. He does know better. But just the fear and anxiety based on these dreams he's having about Padme and based on how accurate his dreams were about his mother, of course he's going to spiral. This makes total sense. We've talked in the past about how Padme is the one person who has been there for him. She's the one person who has validated and understood kind of his trauma throughout his childhood. And the idea of losing her would be absolutely earth-shattering for him.
Right.
I understand that. But yeah, at the same time, it's when she's there on Mustafar, she's begging you, just run away, let's be free. He could have made the choice then,
Mm-hmm.
He could have, you still committed genocide. Yeah, you'd be on a most wanted list for the rest of your life. But truly, if you guys just escaped together, you could have raised your kids together, or child, as they thought at the time. And I don't know, or that's an
But,
idea.
but absolute power corrupts absolutely. And like Matthew has talked about before, in the way that like when you have these all-powerful space wizards, like it's easy for that power to kind of go to your head in a little bit. And Anakin was told from 9 years old, you are the chosen one. You are just like the most powerful Jedi to ever live. And he owned that. And besides being groomed, I feel like having that level of power and not like getting the actual support from the Jedi, like he kept asking and trying to get support from the Jedi, but they kept like Mace Windu kept shunning him. Like it just felt like he was never being accepted, while Palpatine was feeding him lies and also making him feel accepted. It's just, I don't know, like you're 22 years old, you're insecure, you've lost your mother, you have no one to turn to. He has so much trauma.
You murder children. Like, let's be very clear. We're apologizing for, and let me use that though to back up a bit, because I think the danger of this conversation, and Alex, I think what he actually said about it, the way you framed it, actually really helps us avoid that. Is we want to get into this place of, oh, because it's more this group's fault, it's not as much someone else's fault. And what I really hammer on is the idea that fault is not zero sum. It never is. And I think sometimes people who are not Palpatine apologists, but kind of Palpatine supremacists, like they want to say that Palpatine was so manipulative and so good that it didn't matter what anyone else did. And I think not only does that misunderstand the story, that fundamentally misunderstands manipulation in kind of like bad and dangerous ways. Because to me, what Palpatine is so very good at doing, which is what groomers are good at doing, what manipulators are good at doing, is recognizing other people's flaws and exploiting them and creating situations where they will make bad choices. And to me, that is really important because you understand, because you still have to give the agency of someone else. You know, he recognizes that if he sort of tries to push Anakin onto the council, that the council are going to be complete idiots and both like, you know, set up the situation where he's going to throw a temper tantrum and not just shut him right down the way they should have, but then also say to him, oh, but by the way, we're going to ask you to spy on Palpatine now, which anyone with like a second grade level of how people think had to recognize this is just going to push him more towards you. Is that absolutely the Jedi's fault? 100%. Did Palpatine create that situation? Absolutely. You know, and the same thing I think with Anakin. Like I think Anakin makes horrible choices. He is a bad, evil person. But the situations that created him to be that person and the situations that caused him to make those choices are very much the creation of the horrible things the Jedi did raising him and all the manipulation that Palpatine does. Like I think we can see all of this as it is not taking away from Palpatine's plan at all to say, yeah, a lot of people made a lot of bad choices here.
Totally. I agree with that. And that's why I had specifically said that Obi-Wan had taught him so many things because the Jedi did him so dirty. And you're right. Like Palpatine putting him on the council, Palpatine knew they wouldn't make him a master. He knew they wouldn't trust him because Palpatine put him on that council. So like you said, it was 100% organized or orchestrated by Palpatine, but he's not the one who dealt the kind of quote, quote, final blow of that argument that they've had about him being a master, not being a master, the council listening to him, the council trusting him, the council asking him to do things that he's not comfortable with. All that good stuff just came from Palpatine trying to put him in the room.
I agree with a lot of what you said, Matthew, but I don't agree that he's a bad and evil person because we see so many, and I understand, like I'll get to the children murder in a moment, but we see so many examples of selflessness and passion and love, and like even beginning of episode 3, and we see him, you know, they're flying over Coruscant. He wants to stop engaging General Grievous to go help the clones to protect them. Like his instinct is help, save, protect, love, and that keeps being like pushed away and rejected by the council. And I think that the council and the order themselves, coupled with the grooming of Palpatine, creates an environment where like the good person he is can't live. And I think that it does make very poor decisions. He is a 22-year-old white man, and I'm not going to exonerate him. 22-year-old white men often make poor decisions, and that is not a good look for him at all. But I will say that his environment created a lot of that, and he absolutely could have been smarter in a lot of what he did. But I think when he got to the point where he doesn't kill, I guess he disarms Mace Windu. Sorry.
He utterly creates the situation that allows Palpatine to kill him. Like
yes, he does.
Any court of law would say that both Palpatine and Anakin are guilty of murder.
Yes. So when that happened, I think Anakin had basically he went over the threshold, and as we have seen through, I'll never remember the name of the book with Asajj Ventress and
Dark Disciple.
Thank you, Dark Disciple. As we've seen in that, when you let the dark side in, it's so easily, even in someone very kind of more disciplined as a Jedi overall, as Quinlan would be, it can run rampant and take over you completely. And Anakin was undisciplined and passionate and very emotional. And so when he fully let the dark side in, with how powerful he is in the Force, how connected he is to the Force, and how passionate and open he is, I think it just took over him completely. And I'm not saying that exonerates his actions of killing children, but I think when he let the dark side in that deeply and he's gotten that far, it almost becomes a separate person. And we have seen, and we've talked about this, we've seen the two personas of Darth Vader and Anakin come out in multiple forms of media, and they've made a very, very hard push on that in the Obi-Wan show and Ahsoka show to depict them as basically two different individuals almost. And in the Thrawn books, where Vader refers to his former self as that Jedi and never talking about, he talks about Anakin in the third person. I don't know if that's just mental illness to the next level that he's developed, or what's
Anakin
going on.
Kill him if he doesn't. So
he just keeps saying, I destroyed Anakin Skywalker. Anakin Skywalker is dead. So I think the dark side really takes over him to the point where it's not like we can't put normal human values on it, because we're not dealing with normal human values. We're dealing with this all-powerful dark side force that none of us know how we would react if we were to come into contact with such a powerful, mystical, evil presence. I don't know. I just think that there's more to it. Anakin has blame, but he is also, in my opinion, in so many different levels, a severe victim in this situation that created Darth Vader.
I guess I don't think those things are mutually exclusive. I think that most of the worst people in the world probably were treated I don't think most people just it's part of why I think unlimited power is the worst line in all of cinema, because I don't think most people just wake up and decide, you know what, I'm going to be evil. And evil maybe isn't a dumb word because there's so much connotations and stuff like that. I think that we can hold, and I was going to hold off on the Anakin specific dialogue, but we're here now, so we might as well discuss it. I think that there's a danger in putting you're evil, you're a bad person, or you were a victim and you were made this way as opposite thing. I think they very much coexist. And I think that's because Ahsoka was also treated terribly by the council, but she made different choices.
She did.
Other can make different choices. And I think I think it is very much to Anakin's benefit to separate those two as two different people. But I just think that I think it gets very dangerous when we start apologizing for people and excusing them for what they did based on the things that were done to them. I think the situation, the Jedi created the situation, and Palpatine created the situation that made Anakin into the person he is at that time.
Mm-hmm.
But he is that person, and he makes those choices.
Yeah. And I just want to say a couple things. So first of all, I'm a big fan of true crime, and that's something that's talked about a lot in the true crime community. Is to
be clear, you mean listening to it and learning about it, not performing it, not committing crime.
Correct.
Just to be clear,
I am so far not a criminal. Yeah, so no, it's just talked about a lot when you really dive into serial killers or these people who did these horrible murders. Yeah, a lot of them were horribly abused as children. Things that many of us might not even be able to imagine. But for every single one of those, there's someone who was horribly abused and turned that and decided to become a social worker and help other people in those situations. Or turned it and moved on and just lived their own great life. And so, yeah, it's a conversation that comes up a lot of, we can feel bad and have empathy for the child that this killer was. But they made the choices that allowed them to go down this path of darkness. And I think that's it's a real world application of this concept. And then also on what you said, Alex, about the Dark Disciple, that's very interesting. I hadn't really put those together, but it's so true. Quinlan Vos, he was He was quirky to say the least, but he was a very disciplined Jedi. He was very in tune with the Force and believed a lot in the Republic. And when he was turned to the dark side, when he was Dooku's kind of apprentice. Oh, spoilers for the book. Sorry, guys. It's a little bit old. But yeah, when he turns and becomes Dooku's apprentice, we learn later in the book, in his eyes, he's still the one manipulating. He's still the one in control. He still sees it as, oh, I'm still just getting close to Dooku. Oh, I'm still just finding the perfect time to kill him. And during that, he kills one of his best friends in such a horrific way that he doesn't even, two of his best friends, actually, he doesn't even deal the blow. He turns them on each other in a way that causes them both to die in these horrific ways. And then when he sees Ventress again, and he kind of like starts to turn back, he's like, no, like, this was on purpose. Like, I lost myself a little bit, but, you know, I'm here to kill Dooku. And he still sees himself as in the right, even though he's murdered. I think at that point, I don't remember how many, but tens, maybe hundreds of people, and people that he cared about deeply. And it's interesting, at the end of that book, we do get like a redemption for him. And we see in Anakin Skywalker, he doesn't necessarily get that redemption. I mean, yes, at the end of the original trilogy, he turns back. There's a kind of quote, quote, redemption. But as we've talked around, you can't really redeem someone for committing genocide.
Right.
Even if they try to turn back.
And I will say, I don't think Quinlan Voss's redemption at the end of Dark Disciple is fully earned, but that's another story entirely.
And to your point, just quickly, Erin, and like I agree with, and I think that like you see again in other media forms, Vader continues trying to take on an apprentice. I know it's like the Sith way, but he keeps being like, we can overthrow Palpatine, we can destroy him, and I think in his own twisted way, Anakin does still see like, I can take over the whole galaxy, and then I can make things better. Because I'm sure there's a part of him that still remembers, you know, I was a slave, I was tortured, I can make the galaxy the way I want it to be and make it better because I have been through all this. And I also agree that, like, I'm not saying Anakin didn't do some awful things. He absolutely did. But, like, you know, Ahsoka wasn't being, again, groomed by the most evil man in the galaxy and, like, had his hand held through all of these things. Like, I think if Palpatine wasn't in the picture, Anakin would never, ever have done this. He would continue to be a powerful Jedi because he chose a path of good. He wanted to help others. But I really think you can't underestimate the influence that an evil man. It's like saying that, like, if you take two abused children, you give one to you know, a church and you give one to another church, but that church also has Adolf Hitler hanging around all the time. Which kid's going to turn out better? I mean, like, he didn't have a fair shot, to grow up and not become, you know, this person he became. And he did come back around. He did redeem himself.
He decided to save his son. He decided to protect the person, you know. I think that's a whole other story we can get into another time.
Fair.
Or as part of the, I mean, I think we have to do a whole other episode just on Anakin. I think that what I would say, and kind of back up where Aaron was coming from, because Alex, you said, well, but like he did think that he was doing this to make it better. Hitler honestly thought he was making the world better for the German people, his people. Every tyrant, like, that's part of why I think unlimited power is such not just bad writing, but such, like, I don't like that idea being put out into the world, because I think the fact is most of the worst people in the world, in terms of not like, you know, serial killers, but in terms of like dictators, tyrants, manipulators, like, they think they're doing the right thing. They think they're the hero of their story. And I 100% believe that Anakin / Vader thinks that he's the hero of his story. And here's why I want to push back on a little bit the idea of, well, but the dark side is this mystical thing, and so we can't really bring our own judgment to it. Because for me, at least, the reason the dark side is so powerful is it is a incredible metaphor and giving kind of a supernatural power to something that is very, very true in our own lives. How often have someone you know, or just even yourself, been wronged by someone else, and you start seeing red, and all of a sudden, like, anything and everything you can do to get back at your ex because of how they hurt you, maybe incredibly legitimately, is now morally justified. And oh wait, this person's taking my ex's side. Well, they're my enemy too now. If they're not on my side, they're against me. Like, that's how people think a lot of the time. part of why Star Wars hit me so hard when I was a kid is that it was around that I started watching around the time my parents were already having problems a lot. They were yelling at each other and arguing all the time. And most of the time I could hear the truth that each of them were saying, and I could hear that they weren't hearing each other because they were just so angry at each other. And to me, I was like, oh, that the dark side is the perfect metaphor for this. And every time I have felt like I have been wronged, I am angered, or I need to protect someone else, to me, that's the dark side. I'm worried for my family, so I have to own all these guns, which might threaten other people. That's the dark side. I think my country is being harmed by these other people, these immigrants, these, gays or whatever it is. That's the dark side. And so I agree with you. And like to some extent, especially when the book tells us to, we have to have a little bit of, okay, well, it is something over the top of what's in our own world. But I think the dark side is very much a metaphor for what's really in our hearts. And I think a lot of how I at least value at a person is, are you able to get past that? Are you able to get out of that feeling? And to me, it's the thing that really kind of makes the leap for Anakin. And I've been doing my best to keep my own editorial feelings about this movie out of it, but I will just say this. I think part of why it's easy to think this is just, this dark mystical thing is that he goes very quickly from, I'm going to kill Mace. I still think Palpatine should be arrested, but I'm going to stop Mace from literally killing him, to, okay, actually now I'm going to murder children because I'm so invested with that jump happens very quickly. And I think that's bad writing, but I think that invites the idea that it's the dark side coming in, et cetera, et cetera. But I think even if you take out that one moment, like, yes, you're completely right. He's a victim. You're completely right that he is manipulated by Palpatine, and that the situation that allows him to be manipulated is created by all these other people. And yes, he is doing what he thinks he is right. But that is all reasons to be sympathetic to him and to be, empathetic, and to do everything we can to want to say, how do we stop the world from creating more people like Anakin?
Or more, I think.
But he was the person who was created, and that is a person who chose to murder children and to stop Mace Windu and to do all these other terrible things.
I think just to what you said right there, I think the question should more be, what can we do in this world to stop failing people like Anakin Skywalker? Yeah. Because Anakin Skywalker was like, he could have been the best of us. I mean, coming back from slavery, he could have been like the most powerful person to like guide and help and like influence the new order, like a new era in the Republic. But instead, his powers were used for evil. And I don't know. I feel so strongly about Anakin, and I'm also curious if you two do see him and Darth Vader separated, because I think that they have, especially in the Disney era, have pushed that very heavily. And I know Matthew doesn't like that idea as much, but I mean, I'm just saying that, like, again, in the Thrawn books, referring to himself in the third person, in Ahsoka, seeing whatever force vision she sees of Anakin, they are like two entities that like mix and match each other. Like, there's a very distinct Anakin, a very distinct Vader. At the end of Obi-Wan, you hear Anakin's voice, you see Anakin's eyes for a moment, and then you go back to Vader's eyes. Like, maybe it's the same person. The dark side makes them separate or separates them, but it feels like very hard. Like, Disney has pushed this idea that Vader is his own entity, a cold, unfeeling, calculated murderer, separate from the kind, compassionate Anakin we know from the Clone Wars episode 1, episode 2.
Yeah. It's interesting. For me, I would not say that I see them as separate people. I see it almost as like a trauma break. Like,
yeah, I think it's
I mean, he's the one who inflicted a lot of the trauma, but the way it affected him was so traumatizing that he then shut off Anakin Skywalker, because that's the only way to live with himself. Because Anakin Skywalker, like Padme says, does have some good in him. He has regret. He recognizes he's made mistakes, and Vader can't live with that version being alive. So I see it as almost like locking it away. Like, he locks Anakin Skywalker away. And then in Obi-Wan, we see that, like you said, Anakin comes back for just a second there. He has Anakin's eyes and like almost reaching out to Obi-Wan. And the way I see that is like, when you have a trauma break and you're confronted with someone from your past or something that reminds you heavily of what caused that separation of self. And yeah, I think like Anakin comes back for a moment because I believe he's still inside there. I see them as the same person, but I see it as Vader / Anakin has intentionally separated himself to protect himself from himself almost. And then once he's dead and he's one with the Force, we see him in Ahsoka as, I see it almost as he has brought balance to the Force within himself even. Because he's trying to teach Ahsoka a lesson. And at first he's very friendly. And then he realizes that's not going to sink in for her. She needs to be challenged. She needs to be afraid almost. And so he starts to turn and we start to see more of Vader in him until we get that scene where they're just fighting viciously and he has Sith eyes and everything like that. And the moment Ahsoka bests him, he's back to Anakin. Because the way I see it, in this Force ghost of himself, he's able to use both sides of him to get points across. And I see it almost as maybe he has reconciled and brought balance to the Force within himself. Because that's why the Chosen One was the Chosen One. Obi-Wan says at the end, you were supposed to destroy the Sith. You were supposed to bring balance to the Force. Those two sentences are not the same thing. If we're talking about genuine balance on a scale, bringing balance to the Force would mean there's two Sith and there's two Jedi, or there's neither of either.
Or it's just this idea of, and I think this is the whole other conversation, like allowing some room to have to feel emotion and not being as lockstep against it as the Jedi are. And so I think Erin actually said it perfectly in terms of that question you had of, because not that I'm against what Disney has done, but I do think that it's a way of letting Anakin off the hook somewhat. And here is the main response I had. Now it goes back to your question. I agree. To me, the discussion of blame, part of why it's pointless is I also think that it's connected to this idea of punishment. And so who should we feel bad about? And therefore who should be punished? I think the whole, that's everything that's wrong with our justice system and our morality of thinking about these kind of things. That's not what I care about. I don't want anyone punished in that way. I want to figure out how do we do better. And like you said, that seems like where you're coming from too. So I think we should understand we absolutely have to teach people, how did everyone fail Anakin? Because I think Anakin is every kid that gets groomed and every kid that gets lured to the, far right or any kind of extremism. It's not the super popular kids who that happens to. Again, that doesn't justify it, but it also means that, it is people who are getting shut out, all this kind of stuff. But also, like, if I was going to use this as a moral teaching lesson, I'd want to be like, here's the danger signs to look for in a manipulator like Palpatine. Here's the way we fail our youth in all the ways the Jedi did. But also, we need to teach you to not make the choices Anakin did. Because if we say, well, Anakin would just do, and any of us would do that, then we're teaching people it's okay to do that. And that's where I think we have to not be apologists. We have to be willing. You guys have it up on their thing as a joke, and I'm not saying that, but I think there are actual apologists out there, and they scare the hell out of me. Because I think there's something incredibly dangerous about saying Anakin is justified, or of course Anakin made those choices. Because as you said, Erin, like, there are other people in the world who get treated horribly and have manipulated people around them and don't make the choices that they do. That's not to say one is better or worse even, but is to say that, like, what I think in the Star Wars world and in our own world, like, if people were to look at the story of Anakin in the Star Wars world 500 years later, I would hope that they'd be able to say all these people failed Anakin, and one of the people who failed Anakin was Anakin. And that if we apologize for him, if we let him off the hook, then we're failing to help prevent more people from making those choices.
Yeah, it's like ignoring the fact that there was a choice.
Right. And I think the other thing I would just add to that is that, because I think it's possible also, I think you're right, Anakin does a lot of really great things, but a lot of the incredible selfishness, the putting himself and what he thinks is right above everybody else, and to hell with the consequences to anyone else. I mean, we see those things in Anakin Skywalker long before he becomes Darth Vader.
We do.
I've commented about the romance in Attack of the Clones, and there's a part of me that wants to think it's really brilliant, or just that George Lucas is another toxic male. I don't know. But like all of the stuff about, the kiss you never should have given me. Like, I blame you for making me feel what I feel for you. That's an incel talking. That's, oh, you dressed that way, therefore it's justified that I came on to you. You know, like that's always been Anakin.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but Anakin's also been that sweet guy trying to help out and who can take Padme on. I mean, thing is, you're right. There's the Anakin who wants to take Padme on a romantic date and go out of his way to get her, you know, the right Jogan fruits for her cake, and there's the Anakin that wants to put some guy coming on to her into a chokehold and beat the living crap out of him with his bare fists.
Yeah.
So I mean, like, I think that I also do think, and we also have talked about Anakin for 45 minutes, so I know we should move on. But the last thing I wanted to say is that I think that it is also common for people who have very big hearts and are very passionate to also feel other emotions very intensely. And I think that he did not control his anger because he felt all those emotions very, very intensely, was told to suppress them, not told how to actually deal with them in a healthy way. And so, sure, when he was coming out and with his kindness and selflessness part, everyone's like, yeah, you can be as emotional as you want with that. But when he came out with the anger and stuff, he was just like, deal with it. Like, no, there's no useful way to work on that. And so then it just continued to build and play into Palpatine's hands until, everyone failed him. I will ask the question of you two to move off of Anakin and onto one of my favorite Jedi. Do you think Obi-Wan fails him completely? Or do you think he kind of holds him together for longer than he might have otherwise lasted?
We talked about this a little bit. I think it was the Attack of the Clones episode. I don't think that Obi-Wan failed him because Obi-Wan did his best. What Anakin needed was a father figure. What Obi-Wan was able to provide was a brotherly figure because of how close they were in age, because Obi-Wan was not actually a Jedi Knight. You know, Qui-Gon told him, you're ready for the trials. But was he ready for the trials, or was he ready for the trials because he needed to be ready for the trials? I think there was a bit of both for Obi-Wan, and he still had a lot of learning to do, but he agreed to take on Anakin because of how much he loved and trusted his master and trusted that Qui-Gon knew what was right. And yeah, I think Obi-Wan blames himself in a lot of ways, but I think, like we just kind of talked about, there's a lot of it that Obi-Wan couldn't have done anything about. You know, we see all throughout the Clone Wars, Anakin doing these wonderful things, saving these people, but doing it out of anger. Like when he goes to save all the Togruta slaves on Sheely, it is not because, oh, these people are being hurt. It is because of that in some way, but they're being hurt in a way that I was hurt. So now it's personal. And now I can go above and beyond and use this anger to save them because saving them is a good thing. I'm sorry, my dog is barking.
Yeah, I think your dog is just snapping. You know, he agree with you. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think I'm more critical of Obi-Wan, but I do think that key idea of that Obi-Wan at his best was never going to be what Anakin needed. And I think that of the Jedi who failed Anakin, Obi-Wan is lower on the list. But I think, for example, Obi-Wan should have told the council, like there's absolutely no way that we can have him spy on Palpatine, and refused that order and said, and that's the best example. And I don't believe that Obi-Wan could have the kind of connection he has with Anakin and not recognize what was happening between Anakin and Padme. And my pet theory is that's because he got his heart broken by Duchess Satine, and so he can't say that. I don't think Star Wars is ever going to acknowledge that. Who the hell knows where that's going to go? But either way, like, someone had to step in a long time ago and say to Obi-Wan, say to Anakin, wait a minute, no. And again, Obi-Wan is the person he was created to be. He was literally raised as a baby. And I think that's one of the other hardest things. I think that overall the Jedi approach towards emotion it's just not workable. But I do think that there's some truth to it. Like, in some ways, Obi-Wan helps me understand why the whole idea of too old to begin makes sense, because, well, I think we have a lot of evidence, both in the movies, but also especially in later books, that Obi-Wan's existence is incredibly sad. And that's part of why he falls for Satine so hard. That because he never has attachments growing up, I think it's very hard for him to understand. Like, he has never felt what 9-year-old Anakin feels when he gives up his mother. He has never felt what it's like when, Anakin later has his mother die. But so I get that in some ways he doesn't know how to relate to that, but I think Anakin needed that. And in this movie especially, it just feels like there are so many signs. Like Obi-Wan wakes up and Dooku has been, decapitated, and there's clear lightsaber burns on like both sides of his neck, like, do you ask a question or two? Do you ask a question about like what happened on Tatooine? I feel like the only way for Obi-Wan to have done this is to have his head so buried in the sand because he doesn't want to see what's happening to Anakin. And to me, that's a huge failure on his part.
So there's actually, I found, for asking, I found this online. There was a deleted scene in Revenge of the Sith that I wish they had kept in there. But Obi-Wan meets up with Padme and says, quote, "I'm not blind, Padme, though I have tried to be for Anakin's sake and for yours. Anakin has loved you since the day you met in that horrible junk shop on Tatooine. He's never even tried to hide it, though we do not speak of it. We pretend that I don't know. And I was happy to, because it made him happy. You made him happy when nothing else ever truly could." And to me, I understand that it was deleted in that canon, but if that is like how Lucas was seeing this relationship, to me, that feels like Obi-Wan basically felt this immense guilt towards like taking Anakin from his mother, the fact that Anakin's mother died, and that like Anakin was constantly sad and hurting, that Obi-Wan chose, thinking, I guess, that maybe Obi-Wan believed a little too much in Anakin's ability to kind of rein it in at a certain point. Like you said, like Obi-Wan himself, I also believe that like, he loves Satine and he handled her death and all of that. And he's like, Anakin can handle this too. Like, I don't think like it's not per the code, this is not okay, but I'm going to let it go. But I also agree with Erin. I think he did his best. I think that he tried to give Anakin as much of a father brotherly figure as he could. But at the end of the day, Obi-Wan did have so much working against him, including his own experiences. I mean, Obi-Wan had, like you said, a sad life. He lost his own master. He has his own trauma. I don't think that helped his case. But I think Obi-Wan did try his best. And I mean, down to the point where he didn't even want to kill Anakin at the end of this movie, which could be its own discussion of, was that the right decision? Do you finish off Anakin in that moment, or do you let him live? Like,
is that a discussion? Is there any question he shouldn't have? Like, I was going to say, I think that's Obi-Wan's biggest failure.
I was actually going to say the same thing, but I mean, there's some discussion. I think you could make the argument that like Obi-Wan saw good in him and trusted in the words of Padme and Qui-Gon and believed that Anakin was essential to eventually bring balance to the Force and bring the end to Palpatine. Maybe that, in my headcanon at least, that was his belief when he made that decision. I do think that he would have saved countless lives if he had simply killed Anakin in that moment. But who's to say that Palpatine wouldn't have just found another apprentice or another like way to rule that, in the end, Obi-Wan keeping him alive, it was Anakin Vader's weakness of his love for Luke that, ended up saving the galaxy. Of course, plot armor, but I don't know. I think there could be a scene there where you could see a side where you could see why Obi-Wan left him alive. But I do agree. I think he probably should have killed him in that moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think, there really shouldn't be a question that Anakin should have died on Mustafar. That's something Obi-Wan absolutely should have done. But yeah, I think it's just, it was too hard.
Yeah.
And that is one of Obi-Wan's failures. And I think maybe a good way to put it is that Obi-Wan did his best. He did not do the best he could do.
Mm-hmm.
He did his best considering his own trauma. If he had been more of a Jedi and was able to separate how he felt about losing Qui-Gon, how he felt about losing Satine, maybe he would have been able to call Anakin out sooner.
Right.
And yeah, I think it's just, like you said, he has his head buried so far in the sand, but for what he's experienced, I see it as that is his way to survive. The same way that Vader shuts Anakin away. Obi-Wan is able to live with a quote, quote, clear conscience because he's able to ignore and pretend he doesn't know about their love and ignore these signs of Anakin. Ahsoka sees it a lot in the Clone Wars, but Obi-Wan does too. Anakin dipping into the dark side to do things he shouldn't. He force chokes people many times as a Jedi. It's not something Jedi are known to do. So I think he absolutely should have killed Anakin. But again, that's Obi-Wan doing his best.
Right.
Within his own
and
emotions and his own fears, he was not strong enough to finish the job.
And this lets me get back to the Jedi that I wanted to talk about in terms of where some blame can be placed. Obi-Wan said to Yoda, "I can't do this," and like for plot, we needed to have those two fights. But well, they thought we needed to have those two fights, but like Yoda could have been like, "Yeah, you're right. You probably can't do it. Let's team up together and take on Palpatine." The and to me, I want to talk about Yoda because I think again it's easy to just put all the blame on Yoda. I think it's easy to put all the blame on Mace, which I think sometimes gets kind of racist, which I think is definitely something I want to avoid. Although again, the wind up, I just laugh when I watch that scene. I want it to be emotional, but it's so dumb of him to wind up like that. But the pull his arm all the way back. I mean, but to me, the line that really struck me on this watching was him saying, you know, when Yoda's trying to say, like, don't become too attached, you know, and don't be so afraid of people dying, mourn them, do not, miss them, do not. And that is to me such a violently abusive thing to say to a person. Like, I get the idea of to me, I think it's a pendulum swinging too much the other way. Because yes, as I was saying before, when you're so obsessive about like possessing someone else and protecting them, that they are mine, that leads you to some really toxic places and the dark side, if you want to call it that, both in terms of like jealousy, but in terms of also like, I have to, you know, I can protect them at all costs and kill anyone who I think is a threat to them or whatever it is. But then to go all the way to the other side of mourn them, do not, miss them, do not, when to me, the kind of original sin that the Jedi had with Anakin is they never gave him space to process missing his mother and then to deal with the death of his mother. And so, of course, for him, like, it's funny, I've never actually heard people talk about exactly these terms, and it's just coming to me right now. But like, on some level, for him, the Jedi took away his mother and then stopped him from being able to save his mother. And now the Jedi are stopping him from saving Padme. You know, like, of course that happens. And I think, and we're going to get more of this in the High Republic, and I think we're probably going to get more of this in the Acolyte. There's a middle ground of non-attachment that still allows you to have emotional feelings of sadness and of loss. But that line from Yoda to me, and there's so much else in this as well, but that line from Yoda especially really highlights the Jedi just have no idea of how to give people a safe place to deal with emotion. And shock and surprise, Erin, I'm going to guess that a lot of those like real sad kids who wound up growing into terrible adults, you know, in true crime and stuff like that, that repression of emotions and being taught, you know, don't cry, boys don't cry, and don't feel sad and don't feel all this. And certainly, you know, don't feel all these sexual feelings or whatever it is, you know, or emotional feelings or whatever it is. That doesn't lead to good places. Like, repression is just never a healthy emotional strategy.
And there's also like in what he was saying, there's a very good balance. He could have just said like rejoice, like it is good to like, you know, when you're mourning, it is healthy to be like celebrate life and celebrate that. But like he could have just said, like, you know, like try and focus more on their life and, you know, celebrate the life they lived. But like the fact that he literally, you're right, like outright says like, don't miss them, don't mourn them, just be happy that they're one of the living force now. And, you know, even if like, you know, we argue that being one with the living force is like the ultimate goal. That's such like this is no offense to any like really, you know, devout religious people, but it would always feel like, you know, when my dad died and someone would say to me, well, just be happy he's in heaven now. I'm like, that doesn't freaking make me happy. Like sure, like it can be a comforting thought could be, you know, like, you know, he's not in pain like from the cancer anymore. Like, sure, like that's, you know, I understand like the intent, but like I don't want him to be in heaven or wherever. I want him to be present with me here. So to say to someone like rejoice that they're one with the living force, like can be part of a larger, like, you know, emotional support conversation, just to say that's basically the equivalent of, you know, in our world talk saying, you know, like, don't miss your mom or your best friend that just died. Nah, they're in heaven. Just be happy they're in heaven and don't even worry about it. Just forget about it.
God wanted another angel there.
Yeah. I'm like, come on, dude. Like,
yeah. And for me, like watching that scene this morning where Yoda's like, miss them not, mourn them not. Not only is that so unhelpful, and like you said, Matthew, honestly, pretty abusive. it's not like you immediately confirm to Anakin this is unavoidable. You know, like you could have said anything mildly comforting. You could have said not all premonitions are true. You could have said just because you see it doesn't mean it's going to happen. You could have said anything like that. But instead, he just kind of makes the assumption, well, this person's going to die. So, you know, don't miss them. Don't mourn them. They're one with the Force. Not helpful.
At all.
So I actually have a question about the movie making here for a second, because that scene, and there's a couple scenes that happen between Anakin and Yoda in this room where it looks like they've got kind of Venetian blinds, and so the room is very dark, and all the light is coming in like through these little gaps in the blinds, and it gives this very weird like shading of light and darkness effect. What do you think was going on there? Because that feels like it's some kind of statement about light and darkness and the good side and the dark side. But I'm not really sure what was being said there.
Well, that's a great, it's funny because, so that's what I at least assume to be like a private meditation room where you're like really becoming in tune with the Force. And
we do see these.
Oh, you can go ahead, Erin.
Just real quick, we do see these rooms in the Clone Wars, and there is an episode arc where Yoda has dreams and premonitions. I believe it's the arc where Obi-Wan goes undercover and fakes his death. But Yoda is seen in these rooms meditating and having these visions, and then later, I think he meets with Obi-Wan in one of these rooms. So I think the idea that it's a meditation chamber is very correct.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I think they also visit him when Yoda sees those visions to go find the Force priestesses later in the Clone Wars. But
maybe that's what I'm thinking of.
I think that there is a sign, because I think Yoda is in more light than Anakin. Anakin's almost in full darkness for it. And it definitely is, I think, like a not so subtle commentary, and like the light is kind of fading, or like the darkness is closing in around Anakin, and like this is almost like, I am coming to you, Master Yoda. I need help. And like, again, not to get back on the defense of Anakin, but to be so fair, he asked for help a lot of times from different people and was rejected or not given anything helpful. Like you said, Yoda's answer wasn't helpful. Like Obi-Wan only helped him so much. He didn't put his foot down like a good parent would. Qui-Gon's dead, and decided to play peekaboo and hide away until everything had already happened. That actually pissed me. I'm not gonna get into that. Sorry. That's a whole other conversation about Qui-Gon, but and I'm sure that Anakin was terrified to go talk to Mace Windu because, from what we see, Windu treated him poorly, because I don't think he trusted him at any point until, maybe when he says, "You've gained my trust." If Palpatine really, it took Anakin revealing to him that Palpatine's a Sith Lord to gain your trust. He's been in the Order for 12 years.
Oh, Mace has no reason to ever trust Anakin. I'm totally on Mace's side in that one.
Oh my God. Okay, hindsight's 2020. You induct someone into the Order. You work with them on missions. Anakin saves lives. I mean, Anakin got R2-D2 to save their lives from like both of them dying together on a mission. Like, I don't know. There was time to trust them a little bit. But regardless, no one helped him, and I think that meeting that you talked about was like Anakin's almost last ditch effort to be like, please, I see these visions. I don't want it to happen again. What can I do? And the Yoda's like, suck it up. Maybe heaven will get another angel. Who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I agree heavily on the commentary of light and dark in that scene, because I see it as that is Anakin's last resort. It is the last place he goes for help within the light side.
Mm-hmm.
And he's given nothing. And so we see like he is just sitting in darkness with these slats of light coming through, trying onto Yoda in a way that this could have been the chance. Yoda could have said something that kept him from, going in, meeting with Palpatine and having this whole fall. But he missed the chance.
Yeah.
Because he was too stuck in the ideals and rules of the Jedi.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a really good way to put it.
Can we touch on General Grievous for a moment? Yeah. The introduction to General Grievous is this movie. We'd never seen him before. He just shows on up, this weird cyborg guy. And I remember as a kid, like, you see him under that cape and don't really fully process him until we get to the lightsaber battle on Utapau, where he like reveals the 4 arms and like, first of all, the CGI close-up of his eyes holds up 19 years later. Good
That's
for
true.
you, Lucasfilm. Good for you. But
Many of the other CGI does not.
does
but
not.
That scene.
but General Grievous specifically holds up really well, I think. And I always found his character very mysterious and interesting. And I'm glad that in the Clone Wars, we only got a little bit of background and really still maintained that really mysterious aura around him. I always thought he was such a cool character. I mean, like, the four limbs and like getting to see Obi-Wan battle him, both like, I mean, with a lightsaber, that was super cool. Although I would say that like rewatching it, every time I watch it, I struggle a little bit because like the way that they're fighting, I'm like, how has Grievous not impaled him 3 times by now? And how are you cutting off his hands? Like the motion of your lightsaber isn't matching what's happening with the hands falling off, but it's still visually cool. And then like, the chase scene and like the final battle where they're like fighting each other. And I don't know how, Obi-Wan didn't like think to attack the one vital organ part earlier after battling him for what we now know to be 3 years on and off. But the last thing I'll say is I always liked Grievous because to me, Grievous felt like, I don't know, like, Obi-Wan had Maul, Grievous, and eventually Vader as kind of his 3 foils in Star Wars. And Grievous always felt like, I am the number one. He is this Obi-Wan, my mortal enemy. And I'm like, does Obi-Wan think about you at night, Chief? I think you stay up thinking about Obi-Wan more than he thinks about you. Like, I don't know. Like, it just felt very like one side, like romance.
No, totally. It's like the idea of like, this is my arch nemesis. And Obi-Wan's like skipping through a field of flowers, like waiting for his next mission.
Like, oh my God.
Grievous stays up at night, hate writing a diary.
Yeah.
What else? What are the last things we want to say about this movie?
Ooh, okay, so first of all, that opening scene is so fun. I do love
iconic.
the fighters. Pew, pew, pew. Rest in peace to R4. He was a real one all throughout the Clone Wars. Gets his head ripped off within the first 5 minutes. That was quite sad for me.
I don't remember ever owning a droid.
Yeah, Obi-Wan did him dirty.
So harsh.
Did him dirty.
I truly do enjoy all the scenes on Grievous's ship. Like the elevator scene is just classic comedy to me. R2-D2 being helpful but not helpful enough, but also super helpful. And yeah, I think in that it's very interesting to see how quickly the fall happened because Palpatine tries endlessly to get Anakin to leave Obi-Wan on the ship. He wants Obi-Wan dead so bad. And Anakin says his fate will be the same as ours. Like there is still so much good in him and he is fighting so hard for Obi-Wan. And I think that's why the apparent betrayal of Padme bringing Obi-Wan, which isn't what happened, but that's what Anakin saw. I think that makes it so much more real because within the week, he just literally carried Obi-Wan's unconscious body on his back. And now he sees it as his brother, the one person he like loved and trusted, has come to kill him and has turned his wife against him. So yeah, again, just another interesting thing to see how far the fall is. Gotta love the Grievous, you're shorter than I expected. I love that we had all through the Clone Wars, Anakin never meets Grievous. Ahsoka fights him multiple times just for that line. It's such a good payoff. Line. I love it. Let's see, what else? What other little fun things in this movie? Once again, we see Obi-Wan riding a native animal. He's unstoppable. If they got 4 legs, he will be on top of their backs.
Oh my God.
What else? Order 66 is always hard to watch. I did not enjoy that. And the one that really gets me is Ayla. It always gets me. Because just the way that we get to know her in the Clone Wars and how she does care about her men. And obviously there's all the headcanon fanfic about her and her commander Bly being romantically involved. And so that's just like even harder for me to watch because there's a lot of people who are like, oh, she's so dumb. They raised their guns at her and she turned around. Well, she turned around because she trusted them. She assumed they raised their guns because there was something endangering all of them in front of her. So she turns around ready to fight and they all shoot her in the back. And it's just hard to see that because the Jedi were wrong in a lot of ways. And in a lot of the books, we see a lot of them did horribly mistreat the clones and abuse the clones. I mean, obviously Pong Krell, but in many of the books,
Fuck
it's
Von
just
Crow.
even little ways. Like a lot of the clones in the Republic Commando books, which granted are no longer canon, the clones fucking hate Obi-Wan. They hate him.
Mhm.
They're like, he's so uppity. He thinks everything is right. Like, obviously, he's got a great relationship with Cody and some of the higher ups, but the way that normal clones see it, he doesn't give a shit about them. And it's just interesting because so much of the Clone Wars and so much of the movies are told from the Jedi's perspective. So
Right.
I do kind of love to see that. Then again, in the books, Order 66 was not a chip-related incident. It was that by the time the order was given, so many of the clones hated and were fed up with the Jedi that it seemed like a very reasonable thing that they would have turned on the Republic.
Right.
So obviously that's a whole different thing and it's not canon. But it's just something interesting that I think about is that going through Order 66, thinking about how many of these clones were like low-key on board.
Yeah. No, I can see that. I can see that.
I don't
So
know.
I'm
For
very
you, Alex?
I'm very displeased that we're running out of time because I have a long list. So I'm going to try and do speed points. First of all, I wanted to point out that this movie, while I've always loved it, gained so much more emotional meaning since the Clone Wars has come out. It is deepened. I think this movie, out of every Star Wars movie, had the most to gain and did gain the most from the Clone Wars TV series, especially the final season, knowing that Ahsoka is running a concurrent mission, knowing she just saw Anakin, knowing the conversations between her and Obi-Wan that go on, interspersed while watching Revenge of the Sith makes it so much more meaningful. And I think also like the betrayal of the clones in Order 66 is so much more meaningful because before this, we didn't have as deep of a connection to Plo Koon, to Ki-Adi-Mundi, who, low-key, I hate Ki-Adi-Mundi. That's another conversation for another time. Aayla Secura, seeing all these people die on screen, knowing that, like, Commander Wolf probably killed Plo Koon. Like, it's just like, a lot of this is really hard to watch. Knowing that, like, the 501st that we fought with is who Anakin leads into the temple. And, like, it's just, it makes it so much more emotional for me. And, like, I think that Order 66 is always really hard for me. And I think that's actually one of the reasons I love this movie so much is how emotional that scene is and how it really hits home for me. And the Jedi messed up and were flawed in a lot of ways, but they did not deserve to be massacred like that. They were still good at heart and tried their best, although they were wrong in a lot of ways and had become steeped in a lot of issues. Like you said, the chips in the brains of the clones to create Order 66. It's a whole other conversation. I mean, I think it's fine. It never bothered me actively, but like it felt slightly like we were kind of backing off of the idea that the clones would willingly turn on the Jedi because they were treated poorly, which I think to me is a more human-centered, give the clones more free will, interesting way of taking it.
Yeah, I kind of like watching this movie and thinking from before the Clone Wars. Like watching this movie with the question mark. Like I watched this movie today not with, oh, the chip just went off. Like I saw Palpatine give the order to Cody and I saw that as a man who's been given an order and I was going to go fulfill the order.
Yeah.
And
it
even
gives
though
them,
I do know. Mhm.
But it gives them free will. And also you like, when the first time you watch it, you're like, damn, the clones that like, are they that loyal to the Emperor, to the Republic? Do they think this is right? I mean, it just adds a lot more questions than a chip made me do it. I don't know. Very, very teeny tiny thing. I don't know if any of y'all noticed, but if you go back and rewatch the fight between Grievous and Obi-Wan, when Grievous takes off his cape, if you look in the background, a super battle droid bumps a normal battle droid in the shoulder and like gestures to go watch Grievous because he's about to activate his 4 arms. And it's just a quirky little thing that they threw in that movie. Another quirky thing is that in the elevator scene, as they're going to save the Chancellor, Obi-Wan, for some reason, could not stop saying Roger, Roger whenever he like was fighting the droids. So if you watch right before they cut away, after cutting up all the droids in the elevator, you'll see Obi-Wan's mouth start to form the word Roger, but they just cut it away because Ewan McGregor couldn't keep it together. Last 2 things. In my still opinion, the greatest lightsaber fight in all of Star Wars, visually, and for me emotionally. I know other people have different opinions and emotions. That's going to be person to person, but visually, the battle on Mustafar. I mean, you have basically like 10, 15 minutes of screen time of just 2 Jedi who know each other's fighting styles so well. And I think also the strongest we see of like actual lightsaber forms in action, like Obi-Wan, if you know that he uses Sorsu form 3, the defensive form, he is on the defense the entire fight. He almost never actually goes to strike Anakin unless Anakin's in a compromised position, which is how Form 3 works. You defend until your opponent shows a weakness, then you go back. And Anakin's constantly on the attack and using, is it Form 4 or Form 5 he uses? I can't remember, but a very attacking form. And it's just the emotion behind that, the conversations they have, and like just everything down to, the infamous, "You were my brother, Anakin, I loved you." I know it's been memeified a million times, but it still breaks my heart because Obi-Wan has been hurt so many times. And Anakin was like, he's the last person he loved so deeply, and he lost him too. And it was a lot of his own failure. And it just destroys me. That entire fight is so beautiful and powerful and emotional all at once. And to me, greatly dwarfs the Yoda Palpatine fight, which I always found kind of silly because they stopped fighting with lightsabers so quickly, and Palpatine just starts laughing and throwing Senate. Like, I get like the symbolism of I am the Senate, I control all of this, and I'm just throwing the weight of the Republic at you. I get that symbolism, but I don't know. It's just Yoda dodging a lot of the time and felt very like not as impactful. And the final thing I will say is the symbolism of Vader lying down, being like all the stuff being put on him to become Vader, and you see the Empire symbol like is what he's laying on, and then you flash back to Palpatine giving birth to the children, and the pain of flashing back and forth, and then like she dies, and then we see Vader rising, and it's like the death. Like Padme to me represented the best of the Republic and the true values that it's supposed to withhold, and with her death, the final death of the Republic and the final rise of the Empire as Vader rises. His last belief and love of Padme shattered. And it's just so emotional. I could talk about this for 8 hours, but Matthew's giving me that I would turn that podcast around. Look, so I need to stop.
I have not said a word. I wanted to hear all these last things you guys have.
I did look up the lightsaber form that Anakin uses. It is Form 5, which is divided into 2 sub-forms, Sheen and Gemso. Sheen is focused on deflecting blasters, while Gemso is focused on lightsaber to lightsaber combat. Form 5 emphasizes quick transitions from defense to offense by utilizing counter effect or attacks.
Yeah, he's very good at that. You can see if you watch, knowing that, and that Obi-Wan's Form 3 is very defensive oriented. Which, fun fact for all our fans, he actually was trained in using a different form. I think it was either Form 1 or 5. But after watching Qui-Gon die to Darth Maul, he actually changed his form to Form 3 to be better defensive, to never let that happen to him, and to try and learn from his master's death there, which I thought was interesting.
Makes sense. The only thing I'm going to interject on those is I think I love the point you make about the symbolism of Vader's rise and Padme's death. But I think that one of the characters who one of the things I most dislike about this movie is what happens to the character of Padme, in that I think she really gets punked in some really unfortunate ways. Erin, you before talked about he could have run away with her. I there's not for a minute I believe that the character of Padme Amidala, that I understood her, would be like, okay, you killed a bunch of children and all your other Jedi, but yeah, I still love you and you're wanting to be better. Let's go run off together. And that's why I'm really mad they cut out the scenes of her starting to organize the resistance. But to me, I'm just such a sad, soft little woman. I'm so brokenhearted that I'm just going to die. First of all, just physiologically, if you were just so sad that you wanted to die that your body would shut down, we wouldn't have emo. That's just not how the body works. And it just feels like such the idea that, her children are going to need her and all these other things are happening. And so she's just like, nah, I'm just done. That just feels so openly insulting to the great character that they had. And granted, you've all heard my issues with the acting that I think is more about the directing. But I was watching it again, and that part again just made me be like, it would have been so easy to have something where, the choking of her, shattered something, or some other way that the injuries that were caused led to her, allowed the babies to be delivered, but led to her death. Childbirth itself can be incredibly traumatic, and that coming off of horrible things could have led to her death. Childbirth can be great and wonderful and magical. Don't get me wrong, but I'm just saying, there were many ways to give without any real need to. You wouldn't even have to say anything. She got force choked and she almost died. She's dying. She dies.
Mhm.
it just made me so
Like
angry. when they
linking
were
her
like-
death to her man demoralizes the character, and I totally, yeah. I mean, I agree with that. I think, like you said, it could have just been like a complication from the birth or something like that that could have caused the death. It's yeah.
I agree. That's the one part of this movie that I just don't buy. I just
Yeah.
don't. Like you said, it's her children. The Padme we all know and love would have fought to the death, no pun intended, for her children.
And for Naboo and for the Republic. Like, I
Mhm.
think there were so many things. Like we haven't even gotten into it, but her speech about like, maybe we're not listening and maybe, we should be having peace. That's the stuff that makes me really long for. I wish we'd had more of the separatist Senate, that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
Because I also do get to the end of this movie and I'm like, you don't just kill the general and all of a sudden all the people who like all those separatist leaders have second commands. Like,
Mhm.
but anyway, just not how wars work.
I think they were trying to make it so like Anakin killed Padme to like increase validity to him, like his fall, but there was no way to do that since the children had to be born. And I think this is just a weird in between cop out they landed on, because I was like, I don't know, like I get like the wanting to have Anakin be responsible for her death, but there's also ways to have him be responsible for her death and not know about the kids. Because to be so fair, I'm just saying, in episode 6, Leia does say, I remember flashes of my mother, just images. When you were a newborn child alive for 10 seconds, you do not remember anything. So that then takes that away. Like Luke's like, I don't remember anything about my mother. But like, if she had been alive for even just like a few more months or like a year, like then that sentence could make a little more sense. And I don't know, man. I just, yeah.
I kind of wonder also, like, him being responsible for her death, but not being the thing that caused her death necessarily, could just be another plot point to try to make his redemption at the end of the original trilogy feel a little more genuine, a little more possible, maybe. Is like, oh, we're going to take this one thing off of being fully his fault.
Right.
It could also just be poor plot and bad plot devices.
And also, she could just be killed by Palpatine, and Anakin would just Palpatine's like, you killed her, it's your fault. Like Anakin didn't go prove that; he just believed Palpatine. So like Palpatine could have like had her murdered later or something, and then Anakin would have just like, it was your fault, man. Like whatever. And, like, I know Palpatine like wanted to tell him that to further manipulate him, but it's just it technically works by the letter of the law, but it just leaves a lot to be desired for most fans.
Yeah.
Well, we have a lot more to say. I think we're clearly going to be doing a number of more episodes over time that were inspired by this movie and the conversations that come out of it. And we're in our bonus content going to discuss that for a little bit. But for everybody else, I have myself, Erin, and Alex. Thank you all so much for being a part of this. This has been an amazing conversation. Really want to hear your comments and thoughts and feedback. Let us know what you think. We have spoken.
Stay classy, Utapau.
It is time to abandon ship.
Star Wars Generations is an Ethical Panda podcast, part of the True Story FM network. If you enjoyed the show, please share it and leave a rating or review in your podcast app. The best way to support us is by becoming a member. Find info and social links in the show notes. Thanks for listening.